Welcome to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. And now, here's your host, Wade T. Lightheart.
Want awesome health? How about doubling your energy? With our free Awesome Health course, you can get a new video and lesson every single day for 84 straight days. The course covers everything from optimizing your digestion, nutrient intake, correct health issues, including weight, skin, energy, immune system, and so much more. The course could easily be worth $200 or $300 for, and yet it's 100% free when you go to bioptimizer.com. That's bioptimizers.com. Once you're there, just enter your name and email to get the first 3 phases of the Bioptimization report. You'll get the report immediately and begin getting your video lessons each and every day from there on in.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's Wade T. Lightheart from the Awesome Health Podcast, and we have another action-packed interview for you today. We have Dr. Nasha Winters. Now, she is a sought-after luminary in the global healthcare community. She's an authority in integrative cancer research. In fact, she consults with physicians around the world, bridging ancient therapies, I love that, with advancements in modern medicine in the digital areas. And she's doing so much great stuff. And she was on a lot of the Bioptimization summits and stuff in the UK. And I think, I hope she's coming back there because I'm going back there this fall. But a couple things to note about Dr. Winters, and that is, since the beginning of the 20th century, cancer rates have increased exponentially. As people know, I'm an advisor to the American Anti-Cancer Institute. Of course, I lost my sister at an early age, which got started to cancer, which kind of started and impacted me. But now it's cancer is affecting over 50% of the population. Crazy. Now, here's the thing. Dr. Winters' first experience with cancer was at the age of 19. She was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer and given only a few months to live. Now, obviously, when you see her here on video, if you're watching on video, she definitely transcended that. So we don't need to know about that story. And what's interesting is she has gone to naturopathic medical school. She wrote a book called The Metabolic Approach to Cancer. We're going to dive into that as well. And she's going to talk to us about optimized, genetically tuned diet shun. She shuns grains, legumes, sugar, genetically modified, a whole bunch of things that we need to get rid of. We're going to get all that stuff. I won't go into all the details. I'll let her talk. And she offers door-to-door consults as a way to support physicians who are working day in and day out to support cancer patients. This is a great resource because there's so many doctors who, they got their training 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, and a lot's changed. They have been handcuffed. They're busy billing people. They're busy doing all this stuff. And you're out there on the front lines educating the people that make the big difference. What a great power move. Mm-hmm. Dr. Winters, welcome to the show.
Wow, what a great intro. I'm like, that was awesome. So thank you for that. Really happy to be here. And as I said to you before the recording started, I'm really touched by your story. I feel like none of us end up in this conversation unless we've had a very personal experience with it. It's no different for you. It's no different for me. And I'm really passionate about trying to help prevent that 50% of the population that may be facing this in their lifetime. And so that's why
virtually everybody's touched by cancer. And that's why we brought it on here, because first and foremost, let's back the truck up. Let's get your back history. Mm-hmm. Just before, like, what happened prior to, because I think this is important. People get a cancer diagnosis and they think they just got cancer the day they got the diagnosis. Yes. Right? So what happened before? Like, what was your life like before you got your cancer diagnosis? What happened when you got that diagnosis? And then how did you just take a terminal determination? Like, this is someone told you it's over, it's curtains, prepare your stuff. How did you, I need to know the whole process, because there's probably somebody listening today that may be in this situation right now, or they may be in this situation in the future. And I think you're speaking from experience, and obviously you're so bright and so vibrant, and you're doing this. This is so amazing. So tell us all about it. Give us the goods. I'll shut up and let you go.
No, wait, this is perfect. And I appreciate that. And just a quick note, we are in the middle of a festival down here in Mexico, and they love to like set off like loud booms. So
Latin America loves loudness. They love the loud.
Yeah, it's the Festival of Peace, which is even more ironic. So when you hear the cannon behind me, that's what that is. So,
that's great. It's just celebrating life.
Exactly. It cracks me up. So on that note, you are so spot on when you say that folks sort of go to bed, wake up with a diagnosis and think it literally came on overnight. And the research has shown us, as my own experience, that this has been going on anywhere from 7 to 10 years or longer before it's big enough and loud enough to capture our attention. And normally our bodies are met with thousands and thousands of insults on a day-to-day basis that we have miraculously been able to handle and overcome until sort of the drops in the bucket hit a particular sort of, mass that it can no longer hold back the tide, if you will. And therefore we start to get symptomatic and see something big enough and loud enough to capture forward. Would joke about the back race off of pregnancy. And, I joke that today I'm still trying to kick the ashtray off her belly. She's like got the George Burns gene or something in this mix. We also had a strong family history well before we knew in the mid-90s about the BRCA gene. We had a strong family history on both sides of cancer. Can you explain what that gene is?
Can you just mention what that is for our listeners?
Absolutely. So a lot of folks, when they hear about cancer, they think, oh, I'm doomed because I have the genetic predisposition for it. Only about 5% of cancers are truly genetic, meaning something that's woven into the hardware of our genetics. But things like the BRCA gene, we act like it's something set in stone, and yet it's actually an epigenetic switch. And what this little fella is all about is how our body repairs DNA. So if you have a hiccup in this particular genetic disorder, this BRCA gene, you are theoretically, and per all the research, a higher likelihood of having breast, ovarian, prostate, pancreatic, colorectal cancers in general. And so we sort of have put it out there into the world that if people have that gene, they're really in trouble. And what I want your listeners to hear is what we've learned in the first time we really knew about this was in the mid-90s. We thought, well, geez, if we just target that gene, we'll be all good. Well, that wasn't the case. And then we thought, well, if we remove body parts preemptively or take certain medications preemptively, we'll be good. Well, that's not the case. And in fact, the survival rate of patients with this BRCA gene is no different than somebody else without this gene diagnosed with cancer. So you might be diagnosed, but your survival rate is no different. So we've kind of put a lot more, I guess, sort of focus on this as the problem, and yet it's just part of us. It's how our body detoxifies. It's how our body deals with day-to-day stressors, day-to-day thoughts, day-to-day food, and down to its core, it's a process of methylation and how it deals with those processes. And that's why it's also something that we can impact with our diet and our lifestyle. But when people hear they've got a BRCA gene, or they had a sister or a mother who passed away from cancer, and they are afraid of getting tested because they don't want to know, what I'm trying to educate people on is that is just another piece of information, and it really doesn't change your outcomes. You want to be more mindful to help your DNA repair itself. Like we talked about, we're all hit with lots of things over and over. And if you do have that particular hiccup, you need to give your body a little extra support. Like maybe don't do, a lot of x-rays, right?
Right.
Avoid, like if radon's in your basement, get it mitigated. My BRCA gene folks are very, very sensitive to radiation. And yet, what do we tell these patients to do? We tell them to get mammograms every 6 months. If that's like, we're actually increasing their risk. I
think that this is what maybe the biggest change that's happened in the last decade is recognizing that genetics is not the be all and end all it has been, that there's this epigenetics, which is here's the genetics and what are the things that turn this switch on or off. Right. And so environment, both as I would say externally and internally, actually are going to determine much more than your individual genes. Exactly. So continue on. I just wanted to make a little commentary on that because I'm super pumped about today's interview.
Well, and why I kind of took that little side road into Brockville is because what we didn't know of my genetics and of my origin was this other component. And we did have people getting sick in my family and getting cancer more often than other families in the community where my family grew up. And we didn't understand why, but we also weren't looking at the fact that glyphosate was brand new, in 1971 to the farming community where I grew up in, or that the smoking really increases your risk of methylation problems down to 2 generations below you, at least, that were shown. So if a parent was a smoker, even second or third hand to their offspring, their likelihood of cancer is much higher. So what we didn't find out until my diagnosis was in 91, of this process. I didn't know until 1996. I was one of the early people tested for the BRCA gene that I had the BRCA gene. One of the other sort of issues around that was the fact that I was exposed to cigarette smoke in vitro and all growing up second and third hand. That definitely put a little pressure on my system. I also grew up in a very stressful, very toxic, very detrimental environment, so a lot of addictions, a lot of abuse, a lot of trauma. So on ACE scores, adverse childhood event scores, I had 10 out of 10, which is not something people talk about really, about those pieces and how that impacts cancer. And yet we've seen the more yeses you have to the ACE score, which are 10 questions about experiences you had before the age of 10, the higher likelihood of chronic illness and cancer in your young adult life, which fit the profile there. Growing up where I grew up, I was near 7 Superfund sites, right? I lived in a town where there were several Air Force bases and Beach, Boeing, Learjet, all those industries around me were all alive and well. The groundwater, very, very, very contaminated. So now looking back at my colleagues that I went to high school with, they're all dealing with in their 30s and 40s incredible cancers, and their parents have since passed on from really weird cancers. So my point is I had a lot of reasons why my terrain was so broken by the time I was 19. And even prior to that, I never had normal functioning GI. I was born allergic to everything. They had to put me finally on a soy formula because that's what my body could handle. You can only imagine what that did to my growing, budding endocrine system. I started bleeding when I was 9 years old, which was unheard of back in the late 70s when that happened. Today, that's not unheard of, right? But unfortunately, back then that was. And by the time I was 14, I'd had a first diagnosis of cervical cancer, 16, a second diagnosis, multiple root canals during that time. And by the time I was 19, I would have been so sick with such symptoms of digestion, endometriosis, polycystic ovarian syndrome, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, celiac disease, rheumatoid arthritis. Catch my drift? I was not well. Was never.
This is by 19.
This is by 19. And I didn't even know, nor did my doctors, nor did my family think that was wrong or weird. They just associated with that was just me. So to give an example to your listeners.
That's a great point here for a second. And
yes.
I want to pause for a second because this is the part that I find shocking about the world. And that is that people are in this moment where they're like, I have an array of physical conditions or array of challenges or whatever at whatever age. And it's just seen as normal. There's like, there doesn't seem to be any associative lifestyle cause. They just say it just magically happened one day.
Exactly.
And that's the part that drives me bananas because it's like, we would never do this in business accounting system. Well, we just made $1 million or we just lost $1 million or, like you never do that. You would never, take a look at an analysis of a relationship. Oh, I don't know. The relationship just wouldn't work out. It had nothing to do with me, nothing to do with you. Just didn't work. You know what I mean? Like we would never do this analysis on virtually any aspect of our life. But here on the biggest thing is our health thing. All of a sudden, it's just like the stork came in and dropped whatever illness on you, and now we're going to blast you with whatever. And then give you some statistical number about, well, you have a 95% chance of success or a 95% chance that you're going to die, get your affairs in order. And that's pretty much it. It's now we have a mathematical model suddenly after you get the diagnosis, nothing leading to.
And you nailed it, because that experience for me, like all the layer, like how many, you said it so beautifully that it's now we kind of regard it as normal. But I even change the languaging when I'm talking to patients or physicians about common is not necessarily normal. So
Right.
just because
Right.
we see it often and regularly, and it feels like everybody you know is dealing with it, does not make it normal. So that's the difference in this process as well. And like you said, we put more attention on choosing a car versus we do, analyzing our health. We definitely don't do any preemptive. Our idea of preventative medicine in this country is to smash and radiate tissues of your body, or put things up your butt with with a camera to see what's going on. That is by no means prevention of anything. If anything, it's early diagnosis so that people can start treating you in the machine as quickly as possible with no real difference in outcomes, right? So that's where it gets kind of kludgy in all of this. So for me, by the time I'd had multiple drugs and medicines and treatments and diagnoses laid over me, in fact, even doctors telling my mom up until I was age 5, I pooped once a month. And they're like, well,
What?
that's normal. That's normal.
What?
So broken, so sick, so toxic, so symptomatic. No one was interested in the fact that I was so colicky and sick and bloated and malnourished. And, it took until, it was not even until the early, like 2005 or 6 that I was finally officially diagnosed with celiac. Even though now with all the epigenetics we're going to dive into, we could go and see that my entire family of origin had the HLA-DQ gene in multiple areas, making us higher predispositions to celiac disease, autoimmune disease, cancers, cardiovascular disease, a multitude of issues around mycotoxins, so sensitivity to mold toxicity and co-infections. We didn't know this. So every moment, every year, every decade I've stayed alive since this diagnosis, I keep learning more in retrospect. So where I was, if you're asking me, it's really hard for me to go back to that because I knew nothing.
Right.
I was a latchkey kid who lived on fast food and
Right.
boxed packages because that's what we did to survive. We were very, very poor. I worked at Hot Dog on a Stick all through junior high and high school, and that's where I got my square meal. Right?
Right.
My mom, in trying to help raise her children, would send us off to whoever wanted to take us to church with them on Sunday, just so she knew we'd have one good meal a week. Like that's where I came from. So that's this place where nutrition was, we were just doing the best we could, like giant bulk packages of weird pink meat. And my mom would buy 50-pound bags of potatoes and 50-pound bags of onions. And we would live pretty much on Heinz ketchup, fried onions and fried potatoes and pink meat. That's what I grew up on,
Right.
And so those are the things that people ask. I'm like, I can't tell you it's amazing to me. I did not just drop dead somewhere before that. And so the irony is what I've learned along the way. And I learned first, I'm very tenacious. I'm very stubborn. And I think if someone tells me something can't be done, that's actually like a dare. So,
I love it.
it's like, and I think that helped me, anger, power, emotion, the sort of energy behind feeling angry, which is what I was when I was given this diagnosis, because I spent almost a year in and out of the emergency room trying to have somebody help me figure out what was going on, because I knew it was similar like to all of my lifelong experiences, but it was different and it was worse. And everyone's just like, oh, it's just an IBS flare. Oh, it's just an endometriosis flare. Oh, it's just a polycystic ovarian. Your cyst ruptured. It wasn't until I looked like I was a 10-month pregnant woman with the fluid built up in my abdomen, that my organs had completely gone into failure, that I was nearly unconscious, that my oxygen levels were in the 70s, that they realized I had fluid building up in all my tissues outside of where it should be, around my heart, in my lungs, was in cardiac failure, kidney failure, liver failure, that they finally did proper workup on me and realized, wow, this woman is in end-stage organ failure secondary to stage 4 ovarian cancer.
Wow.
And so,
wow. So you get the diagnosis.
Looking back, you can understand all the why, but we didn't know that.
Right. So you get the diagnosis. Yeah. Right. What was going through your head in that moment?
This is what's so wild. And I've shared this with other people. I was in a time in my life when I really didn't want to be here. In fact, I'd spent a couple occasions between the age 16 and 18 actually trying to take my life. And for me, what happened in that moment, it was like a switch went off. Probably that dare concept again was, you're going to die. And even though I had wished for it for so long, I suddenly realized that's not exactly what I wanted. I did not want the previous experience I had any longer. I did not want that pain anymore, but I also didn't want to die. So something in me woke up and decided, no, that's not how it's going to go. No. And I honestly didn't think I would survive. I just thought, well, I'm going to go out fighting. I'm going to go out learning why. I did have an inquisitive mind. I was pre-med. I was interested in biology and chemistry and all those components. I was dual major in those, in fact, at the time of my diagnosis. And what it did for me is once they told me, you're too sick to even have a single dose of chemotherapy. Here's a second opinion, and here's go get the second opinion and go get on palliative care. At that point, the second opinion docs were like, you might have 3 months with treatment.
Wow.
Now that I know, looking back, they didn't expect me to live 3 weeks beyond that point, really, of what was going on in my body. So that led me to being angry that I was dismissed and really ignored and really, kind of just coddled in that period of time. I was angry. And that anger fueled this concept in Chinese medicine known as the will to become. Mm-hmm. And so the anger was the catalyst, and it landed me in the library after my second opinion that had me sit down, pull a book off the shelf that I'd never heard of, knew nothing about. I'm a girl from Kansas, for crying out loud. None of this ideology is normal for me. The book Quantum Healing by Deepak Chopra. This is October, late September, early October, 1991. So the book is relatively new. The concept was definitely new. And I sat down and read it in the library on the floor in about 2 hours. And it talks about paradigm shift. And I believe in that moment, I experienced almost a spontaneous paradigm shift. And it just stoked the pilot light for me again. And it got me active, saying, well, if I'm going to go, I'm going to do whatever I can. And then funny way that we're having this conversation around, you alluded to the genetic versus more metabolic understandings we're learning with regards of health in general and cancer in particular, and even what your company does to support that process. But I was so sick with ascites. My belly was so swollen, and I had a small bowel obstruction as well that I couldn't eat. And the irony is probably the best thing that I ever did for myself, when you asked where did it start, was basically I fasted for 2 months.
Right.
With a little bit of food. I couldn't get anything else. Nothing would stay in. And I didn't have room. So weirdly, way before people like Dr. Walter Longo and, all of this came along, that was probably what saved my life.
Isn't that fascinating that, and I find this really something that I've seen over and over with people who have severe illnesses, is that the innate body's response is I don't want to eat. Mm-hmm. And then there's this kind of frantic frenzy around people. It's like, oh, we've got to get food to them. We've got to get food. We got to hook them up on this, or we got to do that, or whatever. And really what's happening, if you look at all animal species, when they're sick or hurt, they stop eating. And this, I believe, activates the body's natural enzymatic processes to be diverted from digesting and absorbing and utilizing your food to actually being creating to let's fix what's going on inside the body in a systematic manner.
Yes, that's a really beautifully way to state it. And again, I feel like I lived this interesting life of what was happening then? What do we know now? What was happening then? What do we know now? And because of that, it's like a reverse engineering of the process. When I look back at my own learning curve, and then in the future, patients I started working with, and then in the future, the things I know now, it's incredible. Like I sort of accidentally, intuitively stumbled upon things I didn't know. And the other weird aha moment for me is I was in medical school. I work study in the library. I literally spent many a night in the library before they had major, cameras and security. I spent a few nights there. But ultimately, what I stumbled upon, because we were a less funded liberal arts school, we had a lot of outdated textbooks. That actually saved my life as well, because I stumbled everything I was reading about two-hit theory of cancer and these things. I'm like, this doesn't jive. And this is 91, right? This is before so many things we know today. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it was still very much like genetic. We're going to find it in the genome, and this is what it's all about. And, this is where the interest was. But I stumbled across work from the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, and mostly around the work of people like Otto Warburg.
Right. Yeah. Beautiful work he did way back in the day. And what an interesting fellow he was.
Seriously, right?
Right.
Biography.
Amazing person.
Totally. And so this moment is like, I read that, I'm thinking, this isn't at the gene. Despite even the biochemistry of what he talked about, it was so clear to me that this was about the terrain, not the tumor. That's where it started to click in my brain. And I started to realize, well, perhaps if I clean up everything else around this major tumor in my right ovary and these lesions in my liver and these little peritoneal implants and these lymph node, carcinomatosis in my lymph nodes and whatnot, perhaps I can at least maintain it and sort of head it off at the pass was sort of my thought process. So I started there was no Dr. Google. There was, the Dewey Decimal System was all we had, microfiche was all we had.
Oh, yeah.
And there was no guide to how to eat for cancer. And what there was also the old work of Dr. Gerson, Max Gerson, the father, not how Gerson is presented today, which they're very different animals. And so I started, this person who I also became, before I was diagnosed with cancer at 16, because I grew up in Kansas and my grandma worked for MBPXL, the largest meat packing company in the world. I became a vegetarian at 16. Now, 16 in Wichita, Kansas, as a vegetarian, I would go to family gatherings. I'm like, I don't eat meat. And they're like, so here's some chicken. It was not understood, right?
I totally understand that.
Oh my word. And then my idea of being a vegetarian, because this is what I had access to, this is what I knew, and this is what I craved and wanted, was Velveeta cheese, iceberg lettuce, and Vlasic dill pickles. So all dead food, all processed food, probably terribly chemically sprayed food. That's what I sustained myself on. And so when I learned about this process, when I was stumbling on Gerson, I was like, oh crap, I'm gonna have to eat vegetables. The idea of vegetables in my household was canned cream corn, right? And that's not a vegetable, no, So to talk about from where I was then to where I am now. So I made some shifts into bringing in some live, real food into my diet and tried to go hardcore vegan for a period of time, which also likely saved my life because I ate such crap processed food, and started to actually bring in real food, local food, organic food, green food into my life was a lifesaver. But because I'd been so malnourished for so long, that didn't hold me at bay very, very long. For a long period of time. So again, I learned through that process. And then I'll bring in some eggs and maybe some fish later. I didn't even start bringing in a little bit of red meat on very occasion or poultry until about 2010 or 12. So just to give you an example of all the things I've learned along the way, all the things I learned along the way was about lowering my carbohydrate sugar intake. And that was the other common denominator, while increasing my plant foods and cleaning things up in my diet and lifestyle in general. Those were sort of the accidental stumbling blocks, aha moments that fed into what I was learning and what I do with folks today.
A couple points I want to kind of cue on, and I think is really important that I've noticed with what I call the most progressive health practitioners, and that they understand that anyone's diet or lifestyle is an evolutionary process. So what might be okay at this stage later on is an inadequate, for what the future stage is. And there's so many people that kind of get locked in these dietary paradigms, which really lock them out of, if you will, unlocking some other components. And maybe that's the right time at that point. I find a lot of people do really well if they go on a plant-based diet for a period of time. There might be a detoxification factor for it. Or for some people who have really blood sugar issues, they might do very well on a ketogenic diet for a while, or switching to a paleo diet and then maybe devolving over that. And what I found is the people that become the most sophisticated are the ones that aren't married to any dietary philosophy. They see the advantages and disadvantages, and they tweak and optimize based on their own needs, their own requirements, and those factors.
I'm doing the wave for you, Wade.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's like the ultimate inflexitarianism is.
Yes, the inflexitarian.
Right? To utilize what you need in any given moment, and that will change. Your needs will change. And so I always talk about the concept of, in fact, I'm working on kind of a new book called The You Diet, Ditching Dogma, that's the concept, because we do need different things. And I can recognize in my own chronology and my own history how and when things worked really well for me, why they worked really well for me at that time, and when I knew that the tide had changed and I needed to do something different. I learned how to track that for myself. I'm very much a data-driven girl. That is how my brain works. So I'm not about the dogma. I'm about show me the data and let's adjust accordingly, which is where when we started to get the access to epigenetics, that was like, that took my own health experience and that of thousands of my patients to a whole new level. Because now we start to even understand, well, why isn't this person responding as we would expect them to respond to this particular treatment or drug or diet or supplement? It was like unveiling the crystal ball and getting a much deeper understanding, and then overlaying that with their constitution, their condition at the moment, and overlaying that with their lab values at the moment. We can get so incredibly powerfully specific and really use food and supplements as a pharmaceutical. Like, we really can make a huge difference when we can approach it in that direction.
That's beautiful. Now, what are some of the things that now, in your practice today, because I know you work with doctors and you also work with clients. So someone has a diagnosis of cancer, or they have a quote unquote, a predisposition in their family or whatever, and they're concerned. What do you think that person should do, or how they would, connect with you, or what's the process that's going on? Like, what does a person do if, they want to figure this stuff out for themselves?
I love that question, because I think what you are speaking to is what I'm trying to convey to people is we're far more powerful than we're led to believe. We can definitely head things off at the pass. Even if things are really big and scary and out of control, that does not have to be the end of the line. Living proof of that along with thousands of other people I've had that experience with. Catching it the first time, prevention truly is the only cure. So where I start with folks is, this kind of ties back into something you said early on. People sort of wake up going, wow, I've got cancer. Where did that come from? The thing I hear, I can honestly not think, except for maybe once or twice in my entire experience, even speaking in large groups, not even to patients or teaching doctors, my question is, how many of you think you're healthy? I ask that question every conference and place I go. Almost everybody raises their hand. I'm like, well, how do you know? I'm like, well, I feel okay. Well, let's take another step. So when people come to me with cancer, they will say to me that I was healthy until I was diagnosed with cancer. And it just startles me, because there is no possible way that was true. And as I help them start to sort of navigate and sort of go into the archaeological dig that led up to that diagnosis, the ahas, like my experience of going, how in the world did I not have this before? Or what a miracle my body is that it's been taking care of me this long despite everything. So it's such a mindset change. So part of it is you've got to start to take a personal audit on your life, on your cupboards, on what you put in, on and around your body. And that includes things you ingest, but also people you hang out with. And at the front of my book, we have this little questionnaire. It's a 10-part questionnaire based on what I call the 10 drops that go into the bucket that impact your mitochondrial, metabolic health. And each of those 10 sections have 10 questions. So what we invite people to do is take the quiz and, find out where you score the highest. So
where can we take this quiz?
So it's in our book, but I'm also willing for your listeners, if anybody wants to reach out to me on my website, drnasha.com, or through you, if you want to put a link weighted on this discussion. I'm so happy to give people just a PDF of this for free. Like, they don't have to buy my book to get this information. It's a simple questionnaire that I've utilized with patients for them to get their own ahas about what may be their blind spots.
That's extremely generous. We'll make sure we put that in the show notes. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. I love the idea of a health audit. It's like any business, you would do an audit. And when people go to counseling, you do a relationship audit. You know what I mean? If you're at work, there's some sort of audit of, are you performing your job? I mean, this whole thing of, I always, people say, yeah, I'm healthy. What does that mean? It's so ambiguous. And, a lot of medical professionals say it's the absence of disease, which the disease may be present. It's absence of a diagnosis. And a diagnosis doesn't necessarily mean that that's right. It's accurate or gives you anything to go by. It just kind of like, opportunity just rang the doorbell and said, hello, you're a little off track here. And by the way, you need to make some adjustments in your life.
Yeah. And that's just it. And so that audit, that questionnaire does ask questions about personal history, family history. If you know some of your epigenetics, if you know certain, like if you have been diagnosed with certain things, if you are, say, living in an area where you've got a lot of industry, or you're living on a golf course or something. So it's very comprehensive, this 10-part questionnaire. So 100 questions that allows you to see what your blind spots are, and it allows you to prioritize.
Beautiful.
So even if someone starts, let's say you get 5 out of 10 of that question, and that's your biggest one, start there. So let's say it's blood sugar. So that might be where the next step would be actually get some labs, because the data doesn't lie, right?
Okay.
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip, rapid cheat meal relief. Research shows that cheat meals can actually be an effective way to boost your metabolism. One key weight loss hormone, leptin, can be increased by up to 30% following a cheat meal. The challenge with the cheat meals is that all those extra calories and lower food quality can be hard to digest, which means you could be totally sidelined with a food coma after big cheat meals. The solution is to take strong digestive enzymes like masszymes, which will help rapidly digest and break down the extra food. 3 to 5 capsules before or right after your cheat meal can make a huge difference in how you feel following the cheat meal. If it's a cheat day with multiple large meals, you might want to go up to 10 capsules or higher to help you power through all that food. To save 10% on masszymes, go to masszymes.com. That's MASSZYMES.com and enter the code CHEAT10 at checkout.
What kind of labs do you find are the most valuable? Because there's all these different labs and tests. I mean, I'm constantly subjecting myself to different tests and learning information. What are the ones that you think are most appropriate for people? And maybe you can list maybe your top 5 or whatever.
Yeah, well, in my community in Colorado, every year they offer what's called the annual 9R Health Spring blood draw. So this became part of my practice since 2000, that we had everyone for a very minimal cost. It was like $60. They could go and have their CBC, which is their blood count, their metabolic panel, which looks at their organ function and their electrolytes, a TSH, which is just a simple marker of their thyroid function, a vitamin D3, to look at their vitamin D3 levels, a hemoglobin A1C, which looks at the glycosylated end products, average of your sugars over 3 months. And if they were a man, they had access to a PSA. Very basic of that test. And yet what we learned from that over and over in my medical practice as a naturopathic doctor who treated I had a full family practice until I focused entirely into oncology in 2012, is we would catch things, we'd head them off at the pass. We're like, that looks really weird. Your vitamin D is ridiculously low, or your sugars are ridiculously high, or your thyroid is really wonky, and we would explore further. So those basics were what I would call your annual physical exam by far.
Right.
We've learned since that we can go a little deeper, and for about $150 to $200 out of pocket to a walk-in lab, if you don't have a physician willing to order this for you to have your insurance covered, it's worth the investment of yourself, is to get so definitely your CBC, your CMP. I would also get a C-reactive protein, which is a marker of inflammation, very powerful information.
Do you use a C-reactive protein, or do you do that? Have you heard of the pulse test as well?
I have heard the pulse test as well, which kind of gives you like a combination. It's like looking at different parameters within that same arena of inflammation. That's a really good option too. I definitely look at hemoglobin A1Cs and insulin on everyone. Glucose is about the worst reflection of how you're doing sugar-wise. It's so transient, and I have many diabetics walking around with totally normal glucose levels. So
interesting. I know I did one recently called the Homo IR.
Yes.
You know that one?
Yep, that's a really good one. Another one that really is looking more at your metabolic function on that level. So that tells you more data. But these are the ways we can start to know if we are metabolically flexible, if we are sort of resilient. So for instance, on a simple CBC, with what's going on with your white blood cells, what's going on with your platelets, your hematocrit, your hemoglobin, with what's going on with your neutrophil percentage compared to your lymphocyte percentage ratio, I basically know how someone's immune system is working just from a $12 CBC, right? You don't spend tons of money on like natural killer cell function and whatnot. I can tell right away. In fact, platelets by themselves, neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio by itself, hematocrit by itself, if they're a poor ratio, elevated platelets or low hematocrit, any one of those individually is considered prognostic for mortality. Like it says you will die sooner just by having those out of range. And it's like, that's a $12 test. And doctors don't even know how to read that data. So I teach the doctors how to analyze a simple $12. And in fact, I teach the patients how to analyze it. Right?
Wow. That's so cool.
It's so cool. So it doesn't have to be these expensive, funky tests, right? We can know so much. And then on the metabolic side of insulin, hemoglobin A1C, triglycerides, really powerful. If they're elevated, that's showing fatty liver, secondary to sugar issues, not fat issues. And that's where we start to know, because study came out, and you might know this off the top of your head. I can't remember if it was October this past year or the year before. A study came out showing that less than 12% of all Americans are considered metabolically flexible. And by that, what that means is over 88% of us are actually well on our way to metabolic syndrome, to all of the issues related to metabolic.
Can you explain for our listeners what metabolic syndrome, the official diagnosis it is, and why it's important to be metabolically flexible?
Yes, absolutely. So metabolic syndrome is basically pre-diabetes, but what we've related to metabolic syndrome are all the other chronic illnesses that come out of it. So diabetes, obesity, osteoporosis, cardiovascular disease, dementia, cancer, all the big ones that affect us, even like the spectrum disorders, ADD, autism, Asperger's, all related to this process. And when we talk about being metabolically flexible, we all were wired from the get-go, since the beginning of time, to be a hybrid engine. We were meant to be like a Prius. Okay?
Right.
And our bodies were meant to be able, at certain times, feast or famine, or different times of the year, or what food resources were available, or under, like you said, illness or duress, or through childbirth and whatnot. We needed to be able to easily maneuver into burning of fat when necessary, and to burn sugar when necessary. But unfortunately, since about the 1850s, when we started to mass produce sugar and flour and move into the industrial food revolution, we were all roughly in Western worlds. So I want to create context around that.
Right.
In the Western sort of societies, we're all basically what we would call today low carb. Okay, so ironic, that was normal carb then, and today we call that low carb. But we had much less carbohydrate, starch, sugar intake, simply because of the lack of availability and the energy output we had to do to get those food, to get that supply in.
Right.
Today, it is the dominant force of our diet.
And it's refined sugars, refined carbohydrates is the other issue. It's not like eating potatoes and apples and bananas and oranges and, green beans and things like this. This is just pure, unadulterated, straight to the bloodstream.
Exactly. And then let's
white
add
processed
corn syrup, which is all weirdly. But I want to also add a caveat here. What has also happens in the industrial food revolution is we grow to have good subsidy. We grow for bulk. We grow for things to grow quickly. So I don't know if you've ever heard of the woman Jo Robinson, but she wrote a great book called Eating on the Wild Side, and she's talked about how an apple today is like a giant sugar bomb compared to the apple of our ancestors, and we're talking only a couple generations old.
Yeah, this is a fascinating thing, how we've actually mutated and altered the food production, food delivery. Yeah, and we continue to push that envelope of sweeter.
Yep.
And if you look at Asian cultures, where sour and pungent are very much part of the dietary philosophies, and almost exclusively eliminated outside of, in Western cultures of dietary practices.
Yeah, and if you're not getting that bitter and pungent, you're not getting the things that stimulate your ability to digest and break down those carbohydrates in a proper way. So they really stay, even if it is an apple or a green bean, it's not processing and breaking down as nicely into, where it needs to go, versus if you were still getting your bitters or your greens with that. So the weird thing is our palates, just by nature, our first taste in life is sweet. We will always default back to the sweet. And it also very affects our dopamine levels.
Right.
And in a time in the world where we're losing our longevity to suicide and opiate addiction, clearly people are missing the sweetness of life. We're in this, people call our longevity, destruction, they call it the era of despair. And so when we can't feed it into being, and we create these problems. So it's this weird shift in a relatively short period of human existence. So that's why for some of my folks, I have to really, that's been taking a good history and really looking at their labs and really looking at their epigenetics. Some of us are way more wired to just be diabetic than others. Some of us are wired to have SNPs that will never allow us to really properly utilize lectins easily, or starches easily, or even red meat or dairy or, animal products easily. So we can even look at that to check out those nuances and then help people. Like if I have someone who has SNPs in labs and they're dealing with a cancering process that's really glucose driven, I'm going to have to take them off anything that's going to kick up their desire for more sweet for a period of time until things stabilize. And the irony is you can so quickly change your taste buds. And my folks that they basically get off the legumes and the potatoes and the grains and all the fruit and get really simple on, good quality, all their above ground leafy vegetables, and get their little bit of, tiny bit of protein and their massive amounts of fat for a period of time will reset their leptin and their ghrelin levels, and they'll reset their cravings, and they'll reset the dopamine response, and suddenly they self-regulate again. And that, my friends, is where we come back to metabolic flexibility. And that's the place where sometimes, as we should in the summers, we should be feasting more, because the bulk around us, the harvest is great. And it is sweeter foods and fruits, and then the winters is when we kind of get down to the bottom of the barrel, literally, and we go into a little bit of, why do we have animals that can hibernate? Because they can move into burning ketones and burning fat stores in that time. That's how we roll with this. So it's this place we've gotten so far away from sort of the natural cycle and flow of things. And it's the gift and the curse of what we're all exposed to and have made readily available to us. But really, should I be eating a papaya in December in Durango, Colorado? Probably not, but eating a papaya in, say, Mexico in the middle of the winter when they're ripe and coming off the trees, they have a very different impact on your metabolic levels as well. So that's a really different thing to consider too, is your season and, the quality of the food into all of this.
Beautifully said, well said. So talk to me now that, and by the way, for all our listeners, just go get the book. Go to the site. Show notes of that. This is fascinating stuff, and I think super practical. So tell me about your work with doctors now and how you're educating them about what they need to do to better serve their patients, because I think that's really important. And there's so many great doctors out there, and a lot of people don't understand. I mean, and this drives me kind of crazy. Is the natural health community kind of poo-poos the conventional medicine, the conventional medicine poo-poos the natural health. But really, these are people that have dedicated their lives to helping other people. They're extremely smart. Most of them work extraordinary hours, dedicating their lives to others. But again, oftentimes they're limited now by just the, running their clinics, paying off all the debt that they incurred, the $500,000 in educational fees and their mortgage, and run their lives and do these hours. And they don't have the time or energy to get the kind of latest and greatest research. I think it's so great that you're working with them. Tell me about that work that you're doing.
This is what's so cool is I worked, in the brick and mortar practice for 17 years and then moved into consulting just directly with patients. And what I found is over time, the patients have become insanely savvy. And this is, what saved my life was my own inner, student, and my life learner quality and wanting to be a participant in my process versus just do it to me, which is what our
a participant other than a passenger.
Exactly. We don't want to be a passenger. We want to be the participant for sure. So what was happening in the last couple of years is, frankly, the patients were outpacing the physicians. Their learning curve, because frankly, their lives depended on it, and they were in N=1, they would have questions. They would want to have someone help them go through all their data to help them find what was true for them. But as you said, even in the naturopathic community, the functional medicine community, or just great old standard of care community, limitations of time and learning and keeping up with this to also take care of all the other patients and their diverse needs is very difficult. So really the bottleneck with that process started to come to it was the doctors kind of holding up the process of these patients getting what they needed. And there was only, so many hours in the day, so many days in the week for me. And I was being crushed under the weight of that, because that felt like that responsibility landed on my shoulders. I knew what needed to be done, but I couldn't do it all. So that's where I shifted gears last year and decided, okay, now I'm going to just consult with the doctors on the patient's behalf. So what I decided is that I would do two things at once. I would help support that patient, but I would do so by teaching their doctor how to support them. And it would equate that then that doctor would know how to deal with other patients. So it's sort of that concept of teach somebody how to fish, don't feed them the fish. And that quickly exploded. I didn't expect it to take off at all. I just thought, there'll be a few people interested in it, right? Ridiculous, the outcomes, because I really thought I'd also draw in just doctors in the know, like who were into functional medicine or integrative oncology. But what happened were these savvy patients would take their extremely in the box standard of care oncologists and say, I'm going to pay for your time. I'm going to pay for this Dr. Nasha's time to consult on my behalf, right? And the doctors are sort of like, They would literally get on the phone with me in our time and say, I don't know why I'm here. The patient's paid for your time and my time. I think this is a big waste of time. Let's just get through this hour. I cannot even tell you how many times I've heard that this year from oncologists, from other standard of care physicians, family practitioners, you name it. Or even naturopaths or other doctors who did work in integrative oncology thinking they already know everything they need to know, right? So the irony of how much resistance I reached, I thought, I'm never going to overcome this. But I have not had a single time at the end of that hour that someone didn't walk away saying, holy whatever, and say to me, this was amazing. When do we meet again about this patient? Can I do this with other patients? Can I do this with myself? So it was really cool to see, and it exploded beyond my wildest dreams of who would take advantage of this, to the point where this year I just launched my first deep dive mentorship with sort of my beta class of 12 physicians I've got 2 oncologists, 3 naturopathic doctors, 2 PAs, and the rest are conventional medical doctors from all over the world who really want to have this understanding. And we just started into this deep 4-month dive, and they'll have the rest of the year to also just be on a forum where we keep making sure they know how to keep coming back to the data and how to use the data. And my hope is to build on this. And so I am ecstatic, because now we will have doctors placed all over the world who will know how to support patients through this process.
That is so awesome and so exciting to hear that you're drawing a mix from both sides of the aisle, if you will. And this is why I think that we are entering into what might be the golden age of true, call it medical or holistic health practitioner. We're starting to recognize that there is value within both circles. And how do we come together to achieve a truly holistic look at that person and use the latest and greatest information and technology in order to, knock these diseases out that do not have to be death sentences. This is great stuff. I don't know of anybody else that's doing this. Is this a relatively new construct that you're doing?
Well, when I'm out there talking to folks about what I'm doing, it seems to be, but I think there's movement. I've got a colleague who's doing this in the Lyme community right now, who's sort of taking that lead. And I'm getting ready to attend in a couple of days the Metabolic Health Summit, which is a collection of clinicians, coaches, researchers, and just lay people interested in this concept. And of course, we're talking metabolic therapies. We're talking about people talking about Alzheimer's, neurological diseases, epilepsy, mental illness, cancers, cardiovascular disease, obesity, diabetes, all of those under one roof. And what's happening is we are starting to get people together because they're the scientists realizing that lifestyle has a much bigger role and diet has a much bigger role in how we live on this planet and how we stave off illness and how we overcome illness. And that's exciting to start to see conferences. They're not quite like teaching people exactly how to do it in their practice day to day, but the conversations are happening and we're all coming to the table together. And I think you're spot on. Like what is different today from when I started this journey, most patients, only less than 30% of patients will tell their doctors they're working integratively, which is unfortunate.
Well,
because over 80% are working integratively.
Wow, that's some great info. Let's talk a little bit. Let's talk about your book, your website, how people reach you, all that sort of stuff. Because we're coming up on the hour, so I want you to kind of take a moment and share. Tell us about the book, who it's for, and why people need to get this.
Great. Well, it was born. My book, The Metabolic Approach to Cancer, was born after I led for many years cancer retreats with my husband. And so we basically do immersions with patients over the time, but we'd have them run their labs the week before the retreat and 2 weeks after. And they could see the difference of what a 4-day immersion could do to their body. Talk about inspiring people. And then they created their own kind of website that kept building it up, and I would have more and more, and to the point where we were doing more retreats than I was clinical practice for a while. And I brought on some colleagues, including my co-author, who's a nutritionist, Higgins Kelly, who actually has a company called Remission Nutrition, focuses on nutrition for the oncology patient. She's doing amazing stuff and started a board certified post-credentialing in the Oncology Nutrition Institute. So she's doing some cool stuff with that. But what happened is we had all these patients saying, you've got to put all the information you teach us in this weekend in a book. So the book is birthing from the retreat experience. And then we kind of filled in some of the details and support around that. From that, it has become, I wrote it pretty much so I didn't have to say the same thing over and over. Thought my mom would buy it, maybe a couple of patients. It's now sold well over 50,000 copies. It's in 5 languages. It'll be out more this year. It's so weird. We didn't expect it. So that's where you start to see the patients are savvy. They're finding it for themselves. But the funny thing is the patient reads the book, then they buy it for their doctors and their family members. And what's happening is we're all coming to the table. The book is an invitation for everybody. There's something in there for everybody to learn. And I get messages literally every day of people saying, your book saved my life. I got upgraded on an international flight recently from the pilot who said my book saved he and his wife's life from cancer, for crying out loud.
Oh, man, that is so amazing.
That was the coolest thing ever. It's like, I've never sat in first class before. It was a pretty fun experience for that, but he did ruin me also. So
yes.
So that was where it kind of started. I really want this to help people, as you have said a couple times, is to empower the person to realize there's a lot more that they can do and a lot more they can do beforehand. So even though it talks about the metabolic approach to cancer, it could be the metabolic approach to life or health or wellness or prevention. So it's really for all audiences in that arena. And you can find more. You can kind of follow me in the social media realm on the name of the book itself. Metabolic Approach to Cancer has a Facebook page under Dr. Nasha Inc. is a Facebook page. And then on my Instagram, it's Dr. Nasha Winters, all one word. And I'm constantly, you can sign up for a newsletter. I've got a couple freebies on my thing about what to do if you're diagnosed with cancer, the first 5 steps, and a really cool PDF on metabolic flexibility. What does that mean? And what roads to Rome can get you there? Because it's not one road, as we kind of alluded to earlier. And so those are the places where I'm trying to help inspire people to learn more, read more, and frankly, make people like me obsolete. That's the goal.
Beautifully said. Folks, Dr. Nasha Winters, she is a force of nature, living proof that cancer doesn't have to be a death sentence. Get educated, find out about her book. If you or someone else know or have dealing with cancer, whatever, you need to go to her site instantly. We have all the show notes right here where you can go to Dr. Nasha, NASHA.com, or you can go to Instagram.com, Dr. Nasha Winters, okay? and get on those things. You need to learn about the metabolic approach to cancer. This is the latest, greatest. She's educating doctors. She's saving people's lives. And the bottom line, it just might save someone's life that cancer is going to touch all of us. It's not an if, it's a when. It might be you, or it's going to be someone that you love. It's a coin flip for everybody. The reality is why not prepare for it now and start taking the action that you can apply some of these things that we talked about today in depth, know what kind of tests you can take, know where you can get your research, back things up, and bottom line, empower yourself to a better life and to truly awesome health. I want to thank you for joining us today, Dr. Winters. I'm so grateful that you took the time out of your busy schedule in the middle of a peace parade in Mexico to join us here on the call. And I'm going to encourage everybody to go in, check her stuff out. And hopefully I'm going to see you at one of the events coming up. Are you going back to the health optimization stuff in the UK?
Absolutely.
I'm going to be there as well. So we will connect up, and I look forward to hanging out and sharing some more insight into your amazing work.
Right on. Thanks, Wade.
Thank you so much for joining us today. All right, guys, that's another week on the Awesome Health Show. Go check out the website. We'll see you next time.
At Bioptimizers, our mission is to fix digestion, and a cornerstone of digestion is gut flora. P3OM is our patented probiotic formula. In fact, we call it the Navy SEALs of probiotics. You see, strong proteolytic or protein digesting activity is paramount to having a healthy gut flora, and of course, P3OM provides that. The good news is, unlike weaker probiotics, P3OM survives the digestion process. What it does is it basically multiplies the good guys while protecting you against pathogens, or what some people call the bad guys. P3OM really helps to rebuild your digestion. And what that allows you to do is to maximize nutrient uptake, energy, and metabolism. To find out more of how P3OM can help you, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.